The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty parking lot of the Copper Valley Shooting Range, located 40 miles outside of Reno, Nevada. Sarah Mitchell pulled her beaten-up Ford pickup into a space near the entrance, the truck's suspension groaning under the weight of her equipment cases in the back. She sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching through the windshield as groups of men in tactical gear and expensive shooting jackets moved between their vehicles and the range entrance. At 28 years old, Sarah had spent the better part of the last decade working two jobs to support herself and save enough money to pursue her passion. By day, she worked as a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic in town. By night, she waited tables at a diner off the highway. Every spare dollar went into ammunition, range fees, and equipment. Her rifle was not the gleaming, carbon fiber masterpiece that most competitive shooters carried. It was a modified hunting rifle that she had painstakingly customized herself, learning through YouTube videos and online forums how to adjust the trigger, bed the action, and fine-tune every component. The most distinctive feature of her rifle was its color. Unable to afford professional coating, Sarah had carefully painted it herself using automotive paint in a deep crimson red. She had spent 3 weekends in her garage, applying thin layers, letting each one cure, sanding, and repeating the process until the finish was smooth and even. To her, the crimson represented something personal. It was the color of determination, of the blood, sweat, and tears she had poured into this dream. Sarah finally stepped out of her truck, the desert heat immediately wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. She moved to the back and began unloading her equipment. Her rifle case was scuffed and covered with stickers from various ranges she had visited over the years. Her spotting scope was an older model she had bought used from a retiring shooter. Her shooting mat was homemade, sewn together from canvas and foam padding. Everything about her setup screamed amateur to those who judged by appearances alone. As she shouldered her gear and headed toward the registration building, she could feel eyes on her. A group of 4 men standing near a massive lifted truck stopped their conversation to watch her pass. One of them, a thick-necked man with a close-cropped beard and wraparound sunglasses, nudged his companion and said something that made the others laugh. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight. Inside the registration office, a tired-looking woman with gray hair, pulled back in a ponytail, looked up from her computer. The walls were covered with photographs of past competition winners, mostly men holding their rifles and wearing expressions of serious pride. A few women were scattered among the photos, but they were far outnumbered. "Here for the long-range competition?" the woman asked, her fingers already moving toward the keyboard. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, setting down her case to pull out her wallet. "Entry fee is $200. That includes range time, targets, and scoring. Competition starts in an hour. You'll be shooting at distances from 500 meters up to the final round at 2,900 meters. The woman paused, looking Sarah up and down. "You done much long-range shooting before?" "Some," Sarah answered simply, sliding her credit card across the counter. The woman processed the payment and handed Sarah a competitor number and a range map. "You're number 37. There are 52 shooters registered. You'll find your shooting position marked on the range. Good luck, honey. You're going to need it out there." Sarah thanked her and headed back outside. The range itself was enormous, stretching out into the desert valley with shooting positions marked at various distances. The targets for the longest shots were barely visible, small dark squares against the tan landscape. Wind flags dotted the range at intervals, already showing the tricky crosswinds that made this range notorious among long-range shooters. She found her assigned position and began setting up. Her shooting mat went down first, positioned carefully to give her the best angle. Her rifle came out of its case, and even in the bright sunlight, the crimson finish seemed to glow. She ran her hand along the stock, feeling the familiar contours, the slight imperfections that reminded her this rifle was built with her own hands and limited resources. "What in the hell is that supposed to be?" the voice came from her left. Sarah looked up to see 3 men approaching, all wearing matching team jackets with the logo of a high-end firearms manufacturer. The one who had spoken was tall and lean, with the kind of tan that came from spending money on vacation rather than working outside. His rifle case looked like it cost more than Sarah's entire truck. "It's a rifle," Sarah answered evenly, returning her attention to her setup. "Looks like a kid's toy," another one chimed in, this one shorter with a thick mustache. "Did you paint that yourself? With nail polish?" The third man, older with silver hair and an expensive watch, crouched down to look more closely. "Is that a Remington 700? Good lord, that action's got to be 20 years old. You do know this is a precision shooting competition, right? Not a garage sale." Sarah continued setting up her spotting scope, adjusting the tripod legs until it was level. She had learned long ago that engaging with men like this only encouraged them. They wanted a reaction, wanted her to get defensive or angry so they could dismiss her as emotional or unsuitable for the sport. "You're going to embarrass yourself out here," the tall one continued. "Why don't you save yourself the trouble and just go home? Maybe try a bowling league or something." "I paid my entry fee same as you," Sarah said quietly, still not looking at them. "I have just as much right to be here." The silver-haired man stood up, brushing dust from his knees. "Sweetheart, I've been shooting competitively for 30 years. I've won more trophies than you've probably fired rounds. Trust me when I say you're out of your depth. Long-range shooting isn't about luck. It's about equipment, training, and frankly, natural ability. That little red toy of yours might be good for plinking cans in your backyard. But here, against rifles that cost $10,000, against shooters who have been doing this since before you were born?" He shook his head with exaggerated pity. "You're just going to waste everyone's time." Sarah finally looked up at them, meeting the silver-haired man's eyes directly. "Then you won't mind if I stick around and waste my own time." The tall one laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Oh, she's got spirit, I like that. Tell you what, sweetheart, when you wash out in the first round, come find us. We'll buy you a drink and explain what real shooting is all about." They walked away still chuckling, and Sarah took a deep breath, forcing her hands to stop shaking. It wasn't fear, it was anger, frustration, and something else. A burning desire to prove them wrong that felt like it might consume her from the inside out. More shooters were arriving and setting up their positions. Sarah noticed that she was one of only 4 women in the entire competition. The others were set up far away from her position, and she wondered if they were getting the same treatment she was. Probably. This sport had always been dominated by men who saw women as interlopers, as distractions, as people who needed to be protected or dismissed, but certainly not taken seriously as competitors. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker system. "Attention all competitors. First round will begin in 30 minutes. The 500-meter distance. Please ensure you are familiar with range rules and safety protocols. This is a hot range. I repeat, this is a hot range." Sarah finished her setup and sat back on her mat, pulling out her range notebook. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes, wind calculations, temperature effects, altitude adjustments, ammunition performance data. She had filled 3 notebooks over the years, recording every shot, every condition, every lesson learned. She couldn't afford the expensive ballistic computers and laser rangefinders that most competitors used. So she learned to read the wind the old way, watching flags in mirage, feeling the air currents, making calculations in her head, and with simple tools. "Hey there." Sarah looked up to see a young man, probably in his early 20s, standing a respectful distance away. He had a friendly face and didn't carry the same air of arrogance as the previous group. "I'm Marcus," he said. "This your first big competition?" "First one this big," Sarah admitted. "I've done some local matches." "Cool, cool." Marcus gestured to her rifle. "That's an interesting paint job. Custom work?" "Yeah, did it myself." "Nice. I like it. Stands out." He seemed genuine, not mocking. "I'm pretty new to this, too. My dad got me into long-range shooting last year. He's over there." Marcus pointed to an older black man who was methodically setting up an impressive-looking rifle with a massive scope. "He's been trying to get me to take it seriously, says it teaches patience and discipline. I'm still figuring out if I'm any good at it." "Well, good luck out there," Sarah said, appreciating the normal human interaction. "You too. Maybe we'll both surprise some of these old-timers." Marcus grinned and headed back to his position. The 30 minutes passed quickly. Sarah loaded her magazines, 5 rounds each, checking each cartridge carefully. She had loaded these herself, working late into the night at her small reloading bench, weighing each powder charge precisely, seating each bullet to the exact depth she had determined worked best for her rifle. Hand loading saved money, but more than that, it gave her complete control over her ammunition. She knew exactly what each round would do because she had built it herself. The loudspeaker crackled again. Competitors, you may approach your shooting positions. First distance is 500 meters. You will have 5 shots for record. Unlimited sighting shots before the record string. You may begin when ready. Sarah lay down behind her rifle, settling into a comfortable position on her mat. The rifle's crimson stock came up to her shoulder, and she pressed her cheek against it, looking through her scope. The target at 500 meters was clear in her view, a white square with black scoring rings. At this distance, it didn't look particularly small, and she knew most competitors here would find this almost insultingly easy. She chambered around and focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and controlled. She watched the wind flags, noting how they were showing a slight right-to-left breeze, maybe 5 miles per hour. She made a small adjustment to her scope, clicking the windage 2 notches. The rifle's trigger was crisp under her finger, the result of hours of careful adjustment and polishing. She found her natural pause between breaths, that moment of absolute stillness, and pressed the trigger straight back. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the desert valley. Through her scope, she saw the bullet impact, just barely outside the 10 ring to the left. Good, but not perfect. She made another small adjustment. Her second sighting shot was better, catching the 9 ring. The third was a 10. She nodded to herself, satisfied with the 0. The wind hadn't changed. Time for the record string. Sarah loaded her 5 rounds and settled back into position. The key to long-range shooting wasn't just marksmanship. It was about reading conditions, making adjustments, and most importantly, consistency. Every shot had to be exactly like the one before it. Same position, same breathing, same trigger press, same follow-through. She fired her 5 rounds in steady succession, each one feeling good as it left the barrel. Through the spotting scope between shots, she could see her impacts grouping nicely in the center of the target. When she was finished, she stood up and stepped back from the line, waiting for the scores to be called. Around her, other shooters were finishing their strings. Some looked confident, others frustrated. The silver-haired man who had mocked her earlier was smoking a cigar and laughing with his teammates, clearly not concerned about the competition. Shooter number 37, Sarah Mitchell, the loudspeaker announced. 5 shots, total score 49 out of 50. 4 10s and 1 9. Sarah felt a small surge of satisfaction. Not perfect, but solid. A good start. Shooter number 12, Robert Callahan. 5 shots, total score 50 out of 50. Perfect score. That was the silver-haired man. His team erupted in cheers and congratulations. He took a small bow, clearly enjoying the attention. The scores continued to be read out. Most shooters were in the 45 to 48 range. A few had perfect 50s. Marcus, the friendly young man, had scored a 43, which seemed to please his father. Not bad for the first round, a voice said behind Sarah. She turned to see a woman in her 50s, weathered skin and sharp blue eyes, wearing a faded baseball cap. I'm Janet. I saw what those jackasses said to you earlier. Don't let them get in your head. I'm trying not to, Sarah replied. That rifle of yours. You built it yourself? Modified it, yeah. Couldn't afford anything fancy. Janet smiled. Some of the best shooters I ever knew shot rifles they built in their garage. It's not about how much money you spend. It's about knowing your equipment inside and out. You know that rifle better than those boys know their expensive toys because you put it together with your own hands. She patted Sarah on the shoulder. Keep doing what you're doing. Show them what you've got. The competition moved to the next distance, 1,000 meters. This was where things started to get interesting. The targets looked significantly smaller, and the wind had picked up slightly. Sarah watched the flags carefully, noting how the breeze was now more variable, swirling and shifting. This was the challenge she loved. This was where expensive equipment couldn't save you if you didn't know how to read the conditions. This was where patience and observation mattered more than money. Sarah settled behind her rifle again, feeling the desert heat radiating up from the ground, feeling the slight breeze on her face, watching the mirage shimmer above the earth between her position and the distant target. She was ready. The 1,000-meter line was where Sarah noticed the mood of the competition beginning to shift. Several shooters who had performed well at 500 meters were now struggling with the increased distance and changing wind conditions. Through her spotting scope, she could see impacts scattered across targets, some missing the scoring rings entirely. She took her time with her sighting shots, watching each impact carefully and making small adjustments. The wind was the real opponent now, not the other shooters. It was pushing from right to left at about 8 miles per hour, but it wasn't consistent. Every 20 or 30 seconds, she would see the flags shift slightly, indicating a change in speed or direction. She had to time her shots for those moments when the wind was most predictable. Her first record shot felt perfect the moment it left the barrel. Through the scope, she saw the impact in the 10 ring, slightly right of center. The second shot landed in almost the same hole. The third drifted a bit left, catching the 9 ring. She had pulled the shot slightly, letting her breathing rhythm get disrupted. She forced herself to slow down, to return to the fundamentals. The fourth and fifth shots both found the 10 ring again. When the scores were announced, Sarah had posted a 48. It was good, but several shooters had managed perfect 50s again, including Robert Callahan, the silver-haired man. He was starting to look like the favorite to win, and his confidence was growing with each round. "Looks like your little red toy isn't quite cutting it," he called over to Sarah as they prepared for the 1,500-meter distance. "Still time to quit before you really embarrass yourself." Sarah ignored him, focusing instead on her preparation. 1,500 meters was almost a mile. At this distance, she would need to account for significant bullet drop, wind drift, and even the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. Her calculations became more complex, but she had practiced these distances before at other ranges, spending her own money and time to understand how her rifle performed at extreme ranges. The afternoon sun was now creating a strong mirage effect, the heat waves making the target seem to dance and shimmer. Many shooters relied heavily on their ballistic computers and electronic wind meters at this point. Sarah relied on her eyes and experience. She watched how the mirage boiled, noting its direction and intensity. A strong, boiling mirage meant wind moving away from her. A gentle drift meant wind across her line of sight. She made her calculations on a small notepad, working through the math carefully. Bullet drop at 1,500 meters with her specific load would be approximately 320 inches, requiring about 82 clicks of elevation on her scope. The wind would push her bullet right to left, requiring an additional 12 clicks of windage, maybe 14 depending on the exact speed. Her first sighting shot landed low and left. She adjusted up and right. The second shot was closer, just outside the scoring rings. Another adjustment. The third sighting shot hit the 8 ring, close enough to start her record string. Sarah's breathing slowed to almost nothing as she settled in for her first record shot. At this distance, even her heartbeat could affect her aim. She waited for that perfect moment between heartbeats, between breaths, when her body was completely still. The trigger broke cleanly, and she rode the recoil, keeping the scope on target to watch the impact. 3 seconds passed. That was how long it took for the bullet to travel 1,500 meters. Then she saw the white puff of dust just below the target. A miss. She had miscalculated the wind, or the bullet had caught an unexpected gust. She adjusted and fired again. This time the bullet hit the target, but in the 7 ring, far from the center. Frustration tried to creep in, but she pushed it away. Emotion had no place in precision shooting. She made another adjustment, smaller this time, and fired her third shot. 9 ring. Better. The wind was shifting more than she had anticipated. She watched the flags for a full minute before firing her fourth shot, waiting for a lull in the breeze. The bullet found the 10 ring. Her fifth and final shot landed in the 9 ring. Her score for the 1,500-meter distance was 35 out of 50. Not good. Several other shooters had done better, and Robert Callahan had posted another 48. She was falling behind. Marcus, the friendly young shooter, walked over during the break before the next distance. "Tough one, huh?" he said, his own score having dropped significantly as well. "Yeah," Sarah admitted. "The wind got me." "Got me too. My dad keeps telling me I'm not being patient enough, that I'm rushing my shots." Marcus shrugged. "How do you stay so calm? I saw you taking your time, really working through each shot." "Practice," Sarah said, "and knowing that rushing never helps. Every shot is its own problem to solve. You can't let a bad shot affect the next one." "Man, that's good advice." Marcus pulled out his phone and made a note. "Mind if I watch you shoot the next round? Maybe I can learn something." "Sure, if you want." The next distance was 2,000 meters, well over a mile. This was where the competition would really separate the experienced shooters from the rest. At 2,000 meters, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds. It would drop over 60 feet from the bore line. Wind drift could push it several feet left or right. Temperature, humidity, even the altitude of the range would all play significant roles in where the bullet landed. Sarah pulled out her notebook and began working through her calculations. She had data from previous sessions at long distance, but every day was different. Today's temperature was 94 degrees Fahrenheit. The range was at 4,200 feet above sea level. The wind was now gusting up to 12 miles per hour, still predominantly left to right but with occasional shifts. She made her adjustments carefully, clicking her scope's turrets and recording each change in her notebook. Her first sighting shot disappeared into the desert somewhere beyond the target. She had aimed too high. She adjusted down and tried again. The second shot hit the dirt in front of the target. She was bracketing, finding the extremes so she could land in the middle. Her third sighting shot hit the target's outer edge in the 6 ring. She was close now. One more small adjustment, and her fourth sighting shot found the 8 ring. Good enough to start. The record string at 2,000 meters was grueling. Each shot required complete focus and careful timing. Sarah's first shot landed in the 9 ring. Her second found the 8 ring. The third and fourth both hit the 9 ring again. Her final shot, taken after a longer pause to let the wind settle, found the 10 ring. When the scores were called, Sarah had posted a 45. It was a better performance than at 1,500 meters, and she could see she was starting to find her rhythm at these extreme distances. However, Robert Callahan and 2 other shooters had posted 47 scores, maintaining their lead. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the range. The heat was still oppressive, and Sarah could see many shooters were getting tired, their concentration flagging. This was another aspect of long-range competition that people didn't always appreciate. It wasn't just about shooting skill. It was about endurance, about maintaining focus for hours under difficult conditions. Janet, the older woman who had encouraged Sarah earlier, was having a strong day. She was consistently in the top 10 shooters, and Sarah noticed that her equipment was even more modest than Sarah's own. Her rifle looked like it had been built in the 1980s, with a scope that was probably older than Sarah. During the break before the 2,500-meter round, Sarah overheard a group of shooters talking. "I don't know how Janet does it with that ancient rifle," one of them said. "Thing looks like it belongs in a museum." "She knows how to shoot," another replied. "Been doing this longer than most of us have been alive. Equipment only takes you so far. After that, it's all about the shooter." Sarah felt a small surge of hope hearing that. Maybe she could compete here after all, despite her crimson rifle and her homemade equipment. The 2,500-meter distance was announced, and shooters began preparing for what many considered the ultimate test of long-range shooting skill. At this distance, which was just over 1.5 miles, the bullet would take almost 5 seconds to reach the target. The slightest error in calculation, the smallest mistake in reading the wind, would result in a complete miss. Sarah sat up behind her rifle and looked through her scope at the distant target. It looked impossibly small, barely more than a speck against the desert floor. She took out her notebook and began the complex calculations required for this shot. Bullet drop would be enormous, requiring nearly 200 clicks of elevation adjustment. The wind drift could easily push her bullet 10 or 15 feet off course. She worked through the math carefully, double-checking each calculation. Her hands were steady despite the pressure she felt building inside. This was what she had trained for, what all those hours of practice and study had been preparing her for. Her first sighting shot vanished somewhere into the desert. She couldn't see where it hit. The second shot did the same. She was missing the target entirely, her calculations off by some critical factor. She forced herself to stay calm, to think through the problem logically. The temperature had dropped slightly as the sun lowered. That would affect her bullet's trajectory. The wind had also shifted, now coming more from behind her position rather than directly from the side. She made significant adjustments to both elevation and windage, taking her time to ensure each calculation was correct. Her third sighting shot kicked up dust well beyond the target. She had overcompensated. She adjusted back down and tried again. The fourth sighting shot hit the dirt just in front of the target. She was bracketing again, finding the range. One more small adjustment. The fifth sighting shot hit the target, catching the edge of the 7 ring. Relief washed over her. She was on paper. Now she just needed to refine her hold and windage. She loaded her 5 record shots and settled in behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed. The world seemed to narrow down to just her, the rifle, and that distant target. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, slow and steady. She waited for the wind to settle, watching the flags until they showed the conditions she wanted. The trigger broke, and she counted in her head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Through the scope, she saw the impact, right on the edge of the 8 ring. Not great, but on target. Her second shot landed in the 9 ring. Better. She was finding the rhythm, understanding how the conditions were affecting her shots. The third shot hit the 8 ring again. The fourth found the 9 ring. Her final shot, taken with extra care after waiting for the wind to die down, landed in the 10 ring. Shooter number 37, Sarah Mitchell. 5 shots. Total score 44 out of 50. It was a respectable score at this extreme distance, but Robert Callahan had posted a 46, and another shooter named David Torres had managed a perfect 50, putting him in serious contention for the overall win. The atmosphere at the range was becoming tense now. The competition was coming down to its final distance, 2,900 meters, nearly 1.8 miles. This was the shot that would determine the champion, the shot that would prove who truly understood long-range shooting at its highest level. "Attention, competitors!" the loudspeaker crackled. "We will now prepare for the final distance, 2,900 meters. This will be a single shot only for each competitor. 1 sighting shot allowed, then 1 shot for record. Highest score wins. In the event of a tie, the shot closest to center will be the tiebreaker. Competitors will shoot in reverse order of current standings. Lowest scores shoot first." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She would be shooting relatively early, since her overall scores had been good, but not exceptional. The leaders would shoot last, with all the pressure that entailed. She watched as the first shooters took their positions. Many of them missed the target entirely with their sighting shots, their single record shot disappearing into the desert without a trace. The distance was simply too far, the conditions too difficult. Even experienced shooters were struggling. Marcus shot before Sarah, and she watched as his sighting shot landed well below the target. His record shot was closer but still missed, kicking up dust in the dirt berm behind the target stand. His shoulders slumped in disappointment, but his father put an arm around him, saying something encouraging. Janet shot next, taking her time and showing the patience that came from decades of experience. Her sighting shot hit the target in the 6 ring. Her record shot landed in the 8 ring, and the crowd of spectators that had gathered gave her a respectful round of applause. At her age, with her equipment, putting a shot on target at 2,900 meters was genuinely impressive. Shooter 37, Sarah Mitchell. Please approach the line. Sarah's legs felt shaky as she walked to her shooting position. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, could sense the skepticism from many of the other competitors. The girl with the crimson rifle, the amateur, the one who didn't belong here. She lay down behind her rifle and looked through her scope at the target. It was barely visible, just a small dark square against the desert floor, shimmering in the heat waves. The wind flags showed a complex pattern, with the wind shifting at different speeds and directions at various distances downrange. This was it. This was the moment that would prove whether all her hard work, all her sacrifice, All those nights studying ballistics and wind reading had been worth it. She pulled out her notebook one last time and began her calculations, shutting out everything else around her. The numbers flowed through her mind, each calculation building on the last. Bullet drop at 2,900 meters. Wind drift across nearly 2 miles of desert. The falling temperature as evening approached. The decreasing air density at this altitude. Every factor mattered. Every detail could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. She made her scope adjustments, clicking the turrets carefully and recording each change. Then she chambered her sighting shot, settled into her position, and began the process of finding her absolute stillness. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat became the only sound she could hear. She watched the wind flags, waiting for the right moment, waiting for that brief window when the conditions aligned. The trigger broke, and the rifle pushed back against her shoulder. She kept her eye to the scope, watching, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The impact appeared, hitting the dirt well to the left of the target. She had misread the wind. Sarah stared at the spot where her sighting shot had impacted, her mind racing through the calculations again. She had accounted for the left-to-right wind, but at this extreme distance the wind was doing something more complex. She looked at the flags again, really studied them this time, ignoring the pressure of the moment and the watching crowd. The flags closest to her showed wind from the right. The middle flags showed wind from directly behind. The far flags, near the target, showed wind from the left. The bullet was traveling through 3 different wind zones, each pushing it in a different direction. She had calculated for an average wind, but that wasn't how it actually worked. The bullet would be pushed right in the first third of its flight, then straightened out in the middle, then pushed left in the final third. More importantly, she realized the bullet would spend most of its flight time in that final third, where it was slowing down and most susceptible to wind drift. She needed to adjust primarily for that left-to-right wind at the target end, not the right-to-left wind at her position. She made a significant adjustment to her scope, clicking the windage turret right, almost twice as far as she had initially calculated. It felt wrong, her instincts screaming that she was overcorrecting, but the math and observation supported it. She had to trust her analysis. Loading her single record shot, Sarah settled behind the crimson rifle one more time. This was it. One bullet. One chance. Nearly 2 miles of desert air between her and that target. She thought about all the people who had doubted her, all the times she had been dismissed or mocked. She thought about her 2 jobs, the early mornings and late nights, the sacrifices she had made to be here. But then she pushed all of that away. None of it mattered now. All that mattered was this shot. The fundamentals. Breathing. Position. Trigger control. Wind reading. Everything she had learned, everything she had practiced, all condensed into this single moment. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. She watched the far wind flags through her scope, waiting for them to settle into a steady pattern. The minutes stretched out. She could hear murmuring from the spectators, probably wondering what she was waiting for. Then the flags steadied. The wind at the target end dropped to what looked like 6 or 7 miles per hour, consistent left to right. This was the moment. She found her natural pause, that split second of absolute stillness between breaths and between heartbeats. The trigger broke with a crisp snap. The rifle recoiled and Sarah rode it perfectly, keeping her eye to the scope. She began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The bullet struck the target. Through her scope, she saw the small puff of white dust as the bullet punched through the paper. It had hit in the 9 ring, just inches from the center. Not perfect, but at nearly 2 miles distance, it was an exceptional shot. Sarah lay there for a moment, not quite believing what she had just done. Then she heard it. Applause. People were actually clapping. She looked up to see Janet standing and clapping, a huge smile on her weathered face. Marcus and his father were applauding too. Even some of the other competitors who had been skeptical were nodding in appreciation. Shooter number 37, Sarah Mitchell. Single shot, 9 ring, score 9 out of 10. Sarah stood up and stepped back from the line, her legs feeling shaky from the adrenaline. A 9 at 2,900 meters. She had actually done it. Her crimson rifle, the one they had mocked and dismissed, had delivered the shot she needed. The competition continued. Several more shooters took their attempts and most missed the target entirely. A few managed to get on paper, scoring 6s and 7s. The pressure was building as the top competitors prepared for their shots. David Torres, who had shot the perfect 50 at 2,500 meters, was next. His rifle cost more than a new car, with a scope that looked like it belonged on a space telescope. He took his position, fired his sighting shot, which hit the edge of the target. His record shot landed in the 8 ring. The crowd applauded, and David looked satisfied. He had a strong overall score and had proven his ability at the extreme distance. 2 more shooters went, both missing their record shots despite expensive equipment and impressive credentials. Then it was Robert Callahan's turn, the silver-haired man who had been so confident, so dismissive of Sarah and her crimson rifle. Robert took his position with his usual swagger, making a show of checking his ballistic computer and consulting with his teammates. His sighting shot hit the 7 ring, and he nodded confidently. The crowd grew quiet as he prepared for his record shot. The rifle cracked, and everyone watched the target through spotting scopes and binoculars. 6 seconds passed. Then there was a small puff of dust well to the right of the target. Robert had missed completely. His face went red, and he stood up quickly, muttering something to his teammates. The atmosphere at the range shifted. The favorite had just failed at the ultimate test, and suddenly, the competition was wide open. Several other top shooters took their attempts with mixed results. One scored an 8, another a 7. One more complete miss. As the final scores were being tallied, Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk to her, to ask about her rifle and her technique. Marcus was full of questions about how she had read the wind at that distance. Even some of the shooters who had been skeptical earlier were showing genuine interest in her homemade equipment. "That's some shooting," a man in an official competition jacket said, approaching with a clipboard. "I'm Tom Brennan. I help run this event. What you did out there with that rifle, that was impressive. Especially that final shot. The way you waited for the wind, the patience you showed, that's championship-level thinking." "Thank you," Sarah said, still feeling somewhat overwhelmed by all the attention. "How long did it take you to build that rifle?" "About 6 months of modifications and testing. I couldn't afford to buy something high-end, so I learned to build what I needed." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "You know, some of the best shooters I've ever met started exactly that way. They couldn't afford the fancy gear, so they learned every tiny detail about how their equipment worked. Made them better shooters in the long run because they truly understood the fundamentals." The loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention competitors and spectators. We have final results for the long-range precision championship." Everyone gathered around as the announcer began reading the scores in reverse order. Sarah's name came up in the middle of the pack for the overall competition. Her inconsistency at the 1,500-meter distance had hurt her total score, despite strong performances at the longer ranges. She finished in 12th place overall out of 52 competitors. David Torres won the championship, his consistent high scores across all distances giving him the edge. But there was a special announcement at the end. "Ladies and gentlemen, we also recognize the single best shot of the competition. At 2,900 meters, the longest distance we shoot, several competitors managed to hit the target. However, one shot stood out for its precision and the conditions under which it was taken. The award for best shot at 2,900 meters goes to Sarah Mitchell for her 9-ring impact." The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah walked forward in a daze to accept a small plaque and a gift certificate to a shooting supply store. As she shook hands with the competition organizers, she saw Robert Callahan standing to the side, no longer surrounded by his admiring teammates. He caught her eye and, to his credit, gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Janet approached Sarah with a knowing smile. "Told you equipment wasn't everything. You showed them all today." "I got lucky on that last shot," Sarah said. "Luck?" Janet laughed. "Honey, I watched you. You spent 5 minutes reading that wind, working through the problem in your head. You waited for the exact right conditions before taking your shot. That wasn't luck. That was skill earned through hard work and study." Marcus came over with his father. "Sarah, This is my dad, James. James shook her hand firmly. Young lady, that was some fine shooting. My boy here hasn't stopped talking about watching you work. Says you taught him more in one afternoon than I've taught him in a year. I doubt that, Sarah said, smiling. No, really, Marcus insisted. The way you stayed calm, how you took your time, didn't let the pressure get to you. And all that math you were doing in your notebook instead of relying on a ballistic computer. I want to learn to shoot like that. A few of the other competitors came over to examine Sarah's rifle more closely. The crimson finish that had been a source of mockery was now a topic of genuine interest. How had she achieved such an even coat? What kind of paint had she used? How had she modified the stock in action? Sarah found herself giving an impromptu seminar on budget rifle building, sharing the tips and techniques she had learned from online forums and countless hours of experimentation. She could see the respect growing in their eyes as they realized the level of knowledge and craftsmanship that had gone into her setup. Tom Brennan approached her again as the sun was setting and people were packing up. Sarah, I want to extend an invitation. We run a series of long-range competitions throughout the year, including a national championship match in Wyoming. Based on what I saw today, I think you should compete. We offer some sponsorship opportunities for shooters who show potential, but don't have the financial backing. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Sponsorship? Nothing huge, but enough to cover entry fees, travel costs, maybe some ammunition. We believe the sport is better when it's accessible to people who have the skill and dedication, not just the deep pockets. You interested? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. As she packed up her equipment that evening, her crimson rifle carefully placed back in its worn case, Sarah reflected on the day. She hadn't won the overall competition, but she had proven something far more important. She had proven that dedication and knowledge could compete with money and prestige. She had shown that patience and skill mattered more than expensive equipment. But most importantly, she had proven it to herself. All those doubts she had carried, all those times she had questioned whether she really belonged in this sport, whether her homemade equipment and self-taught techniques were good enough, all of that had been answered with one shot at nearly 2 miles. The drive home seemed shorter than the drive there. Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages from friends who had heard about her performance. Word was already spreading through the long-range shooting community about the woman with the crimson rifle who had made one of the best shots of the competition. When she got home to her small apartment, Sarah set her rifle case in the corner and collapsed onto her couch. Her body ached from lying on the hard ground all day, squinting through a scope in the bright sun. But she felt energized, alive in a way she hadn't in months. She pulled out her phone and started researching the Wyoming National Championship that Tom had mentioned. The entry requirements, the distances, the competition format. It would be held in 3 months, which gave her time to practice and refine her skills. Over the following weeks, Sarah's life began to change in small but significant ways. The sponsorship from the competition organizers helped offset some of her costs, allowing her to buy better quality ammunition and upgrade a few components on her rifle. She didn't change the crimson paint, though. That stayed. It had become her signature, her symbol. She started a blog documenting her journey, writing about budget rifle building and self-taught long-range shooting techniques. Within days, she had dozens of followers. Within weeks, hundreds. People wrote to her thanking her for showing that this sport wasn't just for wealthy hobbyists. That dedication and study could level the playing field. Marcus messaged her regularly, asking questions about wind reading and ballistic calculations. She was happy to help, remembering how grateful she had been when experienced shooters had taken the time to answer her questions online when she was first learning. Janet sent her an email with some old wind reading charts and formulas she had collected over decades of shooting. Thought you might find these useful, the email said. Looking forward to seeing what you do at Nationals. Sarah printed the charts and added them to her growing collection of reference materials. Every piece of knowledge, every small insight made her a better shooter. She practiced whenever she could, driving out to a local range early in the mornings before her shift at the veterinary clinic. The Wyoming National Championship arrived faster than she expected. Sarah drove 14 hours to get there. Her truck loaded with her equipment and camping gear because she couldn't afford a hotel. The competition would span 3 days, with shots at multiple distances culminating in a final round at an astonishing 3,200 meters, nearly 2 miles. When she arrived at the range and began unpacking her crimson rifle, she noticed several people pointing and whispering. Her reputation had preceded her. Some of the competitors came over to introduce themselves, saying they had read her blog or heard about her 9-ring shot at Copper Valley. Robert Callahan was there too, competing with the same expensive rifle and the same team. When he saw Sarah, he walked over, and she braced herself for another round of mockery, but instead, he extended his hand. "Good shooting at Copper Valley," he said stiffly. "I underestimated you." Sarah shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. Don't get used to it, though," he added with a slight smile. "I've been practicing that long-range work. Won't miss this time." It wasn't quite an apology for his earlier behavior, but it was something. An acknowledgement that she had earned her place here. The national championship was a brutal test of skill and endurance. The distances were longer, the conditions more challenging, and the competition fiercer. Sarah found herself shooting against some of the best long-range shooters in the country, people whose names she had read about in magazines and online forums. She didn't win the championship. David Torres took first place again, with another shooter named Rebecca Chen taking second. But Sarah finished in 18th place out of 94 competitors, a respectable showing that earned her more recognition and respect in the community. More importantly, at the final 3,200-meter distance, she put her shot in the 8-ring, one of only 12 competitors to hit the target at that extreme range. The Crimson Rifle had delivered again, proving that it wasn't about how much the equipment cost, but about how well the shooter understood and mastered it. After the competition, Tom Brennan approached her again. "Sarah, have you ever considered coaching? We're looking for instructors who can teach the fundamentals, who can help new shooters understand the science and art of long-range shooting without making them think they need to spend $10,000 before they can start." Sarah thought about Marcus and the other new shooters she had met, about all the people who had written to her saying they wanted to learn but couldn't afford the expensive courses and equipment. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that a lot." Over the following year, Sarah's life transformed. She started teaching weekend clinics at local ranges, focusing on budget-conscious, long-range shooting and fundamental skills. Her classes filled up quickly, drawing students from all over the region. She was able to reduce her hours at the diner, then eventually quit altogether, focusing on the veterinary clinic during the week and teaching shooting on weekends. Her Crimson Rifle became famous in the long-range shooting community, featured in several magazine articles and online videos. People started painting their own rifles in bright colors, taking inspiration from her example. The idea of building your own rifle, of learning through trial and error rather than buying the most expensive equipment, gained popularity. Sarah competed in several more championships throughout the year, gradually improving her skills and her rankings. She never became the overall champion, but she consistently placed in the top 20, and her long-range shots, those distances beyond 2 miles, were often among the best in any competition. More importantly, she had found her community and her purpose. The sport that had once seemed exclusive and unwelcoming had opened up to her. Not because she had conformed to its expensive standards, but because she had proven that skill and dedication mattered more than money. On the anniversary of her first competition at Copper Valley, Sarah returned to the range. Tom had invited her back as a guest instructor for their annual event. As she drove up to the familiar parking lot, she saw a young woman unloading equipment from an old sedan. The woman's rifle case was covered in stickers, and when she opened it, Sarah saw a rifle painted in bright purple, clearly a budget build with careful modifications. The young woman looked nervous, glancing around at the other competitors with their expensive gear. Sarah walked over, remembering exactly how that felt. "First competition?" Sarah asked. The woman nodded. "Yeah, I'm probably in over my head. My rifle isn't exactly professional grade." Sarah smiled. "Neither is mine. See that crimson one over there? Built it myself in my garage. Let me give you some advice. Don't worry about their equipment. Focus on the fundamentals. Wind reading, breathing, trigger control, that's what matters. The rest is just noise." The young woman's face brightened. You're Sarah Mitchell. I've read all your blog posts. You're the reason I decided to try competing. Then let me help you get set up. And remember, you belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As Sarah helped the young woman prepare for her first competition, she thought about how far she had come. From being mocked and dismissed to becoming an instructor and inspiration for others. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had made her stronger. Every setback had taught her something valuable. That evening, after the first day of competition, Sarah sat on her shooting mat, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and red. Her crimson rifle lay beside her, its paint now worn in places from use, bearing the marks of countless rounds fired and competitions completed. She thought about that moment at 2,900 meters when she had made the shot that changed everything. Not because it won her a championship, but because it proved to herself and to others that passion and dedication could overcome any obstacle. That you didn't need the most expensive equipment to compete at the highest levels. You needed knowledge, practice, patience, and the courage to trust in your abilities even when others doubted you. The young woman with the purple rifle walked over and sat down next to Sarah. Thank you for helping me today. I actually hit the target at 1,000 meters. First time I've ever shot that far. That's excellent, Sarah said genuinely. How did it feel? Incredible, scary and exciting at the same time. I kept thinking I was going to embarrass myself, but then I just focused on what you said about the fundamentals, and it worked. Sarah smiled, remembering her own first successful long-range shot, the rush of accomplishment and pride. That feeling never gets old. Every time you make a good shot at distance, especially when conditions are tough, it's like solving a complex puzzle. You're going to love this sport. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two shooters from different stages of the same journey, united by their passion for precision and their determination to succeed despite the obstacles in their path. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. He had just competed in his first national championship and finished in the top 30. He sent a photo of himself holding a trophy, grinning widely, with his father's arm around his shoulders. The message read, "Thanks for everything you taught me. Couldn't have done it without your help." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. She had found her place in the world, had proven her worth not just as a shooter but as a teacher and role model. The crimson rifle that had been mocked and dismissed was now a symbol of possibility, proof that the barriers to excellence were not as solid as they seemed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new competitions, new students to teach. But tonight, Sarah Mitchell sat in the desert, surrounded by the sport and community she loved, knowing that she had earned her place here through nothing more than hard work, dedication, and one perfect shot at nearly 2 miles that had silenced every doubt and every critic. The crimson rifle had delivered, just as she always knew it would.